Renee Baribeau, the Community Outreach and Marketing Coordinator over at Michael's House. That the Finding Freedom Symposium is January 25th through the 28th, and the 28th is the Heroes and Recovery Run, and it's in Palm Springs. Who doesn't want to be in Palm Springs in January? And there's 18.5 CECs for therapists, addiction professionals, psychologists, and nursing. And there's 2 tracks this year, the addiction professional plus the organizational track for EAP and HR professionals. And our theme this year is supporting gender diversity. The conference is about bringing forward relevant information for best practicing supporting the LGBT community with co-occurring disorders. What is co-occurring disorders? People who have addiction and mental health issues. And right now, I'm sure it's the temperature is running high this year. It's been a really stressful year in this community. And so our getting together is more important now than ever. Now, all right, Lauren?
Hi, Renee.
Can you hear me? And we're live, I believe.
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, and you can see me. We're good. I was just kind of killing a little time while we were going live. It's a little riskier going live, but you don't know who we're going to reach. And so I thought it might be more fun to see if we could reach a few more people that we don't already know.
Okay, awesome. I love it.
Well, should I introduce you with a formal bio, or do you want to tell everyone who you are?
Why don't you introduce me with a formal bio?
All right, there goes the glasses back on. So Dr. Lauren Costine is a licensed psychologist, author, educator, activist, and an international speaker. Dr. Costine has dedicated herself to the field of LGBT affirmative psychotherapy. Women's empowerment, is a pioneer in lesbian affirmative therapy. Her first book, Lesbian Love Addiction, Understanding the Urge to Merge and What to Do When Things Go Wrong, is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And you can get a free excerpt over at lesbianaddiction.com. She is currently offering online masterclasses for lesbians looking to find their soulmates. And she has this new group called The Art of Finding Lesbian Love. And besides for all of that, I have her more clinical thing over here. She's a clinical psychologist, and she received her MA in psychology at Antioch University and her PhD in clinical psychology with an emphasis of depth psychology from Pacifica Graduate Institute. So she's really quite experienced, quite knowledgeable, and she's writing a book right now on misogyny. And that's one of her topics over at the conference, but I thought we'd start with the first topic.
Okay.
Wanted to do that? Okay.
Yeah, sure.
So the conference this year is about, the Finding Freedom Conference is about supporting gender diversity. And one of the things that we've noticed as we go into this unknown territory of gender diversity as that there's an ebb and flow and a dissolving, and things are really kind of shaking up in the world of gender, and politics are really heightened over here, and yet this younger generation is very fluid. And it brought us to the idea that we needed to discuss politics and how politics are now influencing every area. But since this conference is about addiction and co-occurring disorders, we thought we should start out the conference with politics. So do you want to talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, I first want to just say, sort of how I identify, to kind of put out there my potential biases and all that kind of stuff. So I'm obviously white. I identify as a cisgender lesbian. That wasn't the easiest identity for me to get to. I was originally in my 20s bisexual. And maybe today I would call myself fluid. Back then we didn't have that term. And for me, identity has a political component to it because of the social justice piece. But it also was when I was finally embraced my sexuality, which took a long time to do for me because of my upbringing and the level of homophobia that was with my mother. It was a process that I think is important to understand, but also it really helped me develop a stronger sense of self once I was able to do that. That's my journey, my experience. And
Can we go back 1 second? Because some people might not even know what cisgender is.
Oh, that's a good question. So cisgender is I identify with the gender that I was assigned at birth. Okay. So when I was born, I was assigned the gender girl. or female, right? And I've totally always identified with that. That's never been something that was felt incongruent for me or wrong or any problems with it. I love being a girl. So, and a woman. So, that is my, I come to the world with this lens. That's not been my struggle. My struggle was coming out as a lesbian, so I can really, really identify with that. So I just like to put that out there. But I also want to say that I work really hard at trying to understand as many points of view as possible from, LGBT people of color, anyone that's not me, anyone that's the other compared to my experience. But there's no way I can pretend to walk into anyone else's shoes. And that's, evolved over time. I don't think that there was, our community is evolving. It's been really led by gay men because they had male privilege. And so we see a lot more of attention on them earlier on. And then there's been this breakthrough of a lot of folks saying, well, I need a voice. I have a voice. I have a different experience. I need to be heard. Very, very important piece. What I think it can be a concern, and what I think we're going to explore at the conference, because it's not like we're coming in saying we have answers to all of this yet, is the balance and the tension of meeting the client where they are while also emboldening them to become who they want to be if they're closeted or questioning or unsure or what have you. And finding that delicate balance of not putting pressure on them from a motivational interviewing perspective, but also having these treatment centers be educated about what is LGBTQ affirmative treatment in the first place.
Right, and that's a pretty big question because a lot of treatment centers are out there saying, oh, we're LGBTQ affirmative because, well, we have some gays and some lesbians and maybe even a transgender at our site. And there's a lot of people out there who would disagree with that. Like, are you there's staff bias. And even, we would like to think it's only in the straight or the non, I don't even know if the straight is a word anymore.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to get in trouble. But that, even I had a bias. We, like you said, we all come here with our biases. And how do you think that this dissolving this gender fluid thing, do you think that's impacting mental health issues, drug addiction? Do you think that there's some component of nobody knows where we stand and so there's some confusion here?
Oh, I think there definitely is that. I think there's a lot of tension around it. I think it's sensitive. I think, as a community, we've dealt with a lot of trauma for thousands of years. And so we tend to be a sensitive group. And so, the idea is to, hi, Jonathan.
Jonathan came over, and then there's Karen's here too. Jonathan pulled over on the highway to listen to us. I said, hey, we need an audience.
Jonathan, thank you. You're so cute. Oh my gosh.
If either of you have questions, or anyone else has questions, please pop them there, and we'll try to answer your questions about this.
Right. So I think what we want, from the LGBTQ affirmative perspective, and when I was helping build the LGBT affirmative program at Antioch University, we were saying that there's a difference between affirmative and friendly. And I know I've done a talk, I think, at Finding Freedom on that, as far as, or, in and around the community, that we can be friendly, we can be non-shaming and loving and non-judgmental, but that doesn't mean you're affirmative. So affirmative is having the paperwork appropriately, having groups that are, geared towards sexual orientation or inclusive and gender identity and all of that kind of stuff. And a lot of treatment centers will say they're doing that. And I know they're not, because I'm talking to the clients that are going there and there's nothing for them. It's not being addressed. And LGBTQ clinicians or staff or whoever can unwittingly do this if they haven't been educated in what affirmative is. Does that make sense? Yeah,
so tell us, is there some guidelines for like if you're just you wanted to take a few baby steps right now, and say you're a therapist out there, or even a massage therapist, or any other kind of therapist out there, a shaman even, what kind of steps you might want to take that would make your business more affirmative in these changing times, besides for the addiction? I mean,
right. No, I love this question. I think it's great. It has to start with the paperwork. If you have any sort of paperwork where you are asking your clients to fill out questions so that you have some information from them, maybe signing a disclaimer and all of that, ask sexual orientation, ask gender identity, ask gender expression, ask, all of those kind of things. Ask those questions. Give them options to answer what it is for them. Don't tell them. Most of the paperwork in the world is still hetero, cisgender oriented. So that's a really important, that immediately disarms a client, a potential client or a new client who maybe is, still restricted or dealing with shame or fear of coming out for being judged or treated differently, that the paperwork will immediately say, I'm on it.
Right, or I'm open to it. I'm ready to have this conversation, because how do you see that could really affect somebody's treatment right away when there's nowhere for them to be who they are out the door?
It totally affects their treatment. Yes. Oh, yes. That's a great point, Jonathan. That's a great point. It also lets the straight clients know that the treatment center or the practitioner, the shaman, the therapist, whoever, is aware of this, and is working in an affirmative manner. So that's great. That's a baby step. That's easy to do. Just change your paperwork. It takes 3 minutes.
Okay, but are there some models for that? Have you seen any models for that online or something like that? Or
I was always passing it out when I was doing talks. I don't know if I've seen anything online, but you can just add it to your own paperwork. So you could just do, what's your sexual orientation line? What's your gender identity line? What's your gender expression? And you can put some options in there, like butch or femme or bottom or top, whatever. Or you can just leave that also as an option for someone to just describe what it is.
Because don't you think you could get in trouble if I don't know if I'd go that far down, because then all of a sudden, if you really have to train your staff or everyone, because if somebody doesn't know what a butch and a femme and a top and a bottom and all of that other stuff, you kind of start to get, that might think to me that would be something best to lead to the second or third session of your therapy.
Ultimately, absolutely, because there's a lot of choices. It's ever evolving, and younger folks embrace new words, and it's hard to keep up with as well. So you just want to allow them to tell you who they are.
Exactly. I think that's the whole important point, is letting people, there's no longer a box. I mean, if there ever was, there's certainly no longer a box. And that's why this conference came about, the Finding Freedom LGBTQ Addiction Treatment Symposium, and which is, I'm giving a little commercial in case somebody just jumped in now. It's in Palm Springs on the 25th, and we end with the Heroes in Recovery run on the 28th, the morning of. And so we have all kinds of fun things planned. But let's talk about your other topic, your book on misogyny. I think that's where your passion and love really lie at the moment.
Yeah, it's true. Well, I do love what we just talked about, and I'm glad that we're going to be opening up that conversation. I think it's important, and my burgeoning. Well, this is an interesting story. I think I've told you this before, Renee, but this actually was started to be written back with my dissertation over 12 years ago. And at Pacifica, it's a qualitative, research-oriented place. In other words, it's not data-driven. It's kind of theme-oriented. And I ended up doing a dissertation on the repression of the sacred feminine in the patriarchal culture. And it took me on this long psycho-historical research project. I got into the goddess cultures and found out when the female was revered, and there was a time when there was goddesses way before there was a god, and all of this stuff. And it took me to this whole place of understanding the effects of misogyny on the female psyche.
And what is misogyny?
So misogyny is hatred of women.
And do women hate each other?
Yes.
So can we be misogynistic against each other?
And we often are.
I think sometimes that could probably fall. Now, that might be something really important in a women's treatment center or a women's dorm of a treatment center, is that there's that competitive and that self-hatred. And I don't know, when you start to work on that self-hatred, so many people, including myself, used to cover up the fact that I couldn't stand myself.
Exactly. Right. And I think it's so important with the exposure of this misogynistic culture that we live in, this sexist, dangerous culture that we've all been living in for so long, you know, between the sexism we saw in the election, regardless of who you are into, there was a lot of sexism that was exposed in that election. And then this new Me Too phenomenon, this movement, the Me Too camp, and the Women's March and things like that, just like this eruption of, oh my gosh, we're not going to take this anymore, you know, and women finding their voice and standing up to it. That's a great part of healing. It's a really important component of healing. But what the talk is going to be about is going to also be what you just said. How do we feel about ourselves growing up in this kind of culture? Our mothers grew up in like this culture, our grandmothers, our great grandmothers, their grandmothers. We're going back thousands, and ancestor after ancestor after ancestors grown up in this culture. It's embedded, it's endemic, it's within it, it's ubiquitous, it's everywhere, and it's subtle. And so the talk is going to talk more about the subtle components, not the more obvious ones, you know, and how we do end up, you know, hating ourselves. And that leads to a lot of the using, of course, obviously, and also how we are with other women, you know, and a lot of women who end up in recovery will say they have issues with women. And so this talk is going to talk a lot about why that is and how we can start healing that as well.
And so that sounds really amazing. You know, it sounds like that is really cutting edge. And, you know, some people might wonder what that has to do with addiction treatment. But I was thinking about yesterday a conversation I was having with Dr. Davina Kaluski. I can't say it. That Kotuulski. Kaluski. One of her former patient calls her Dr. Ski. I can see why. It's kind of one of those mouthfuls. Hope you're not listening, Davina. If you are, please forgive me. But we were talking about how in our parents' generation, when we talk about the topics of things that we are now bringing to the forefront, you know, that was dirty laundry you didn't want to air. And I was just thinking as you were talking about, wow, that self-hatred went so deep that we would cover up the abuse and the psychological abuse and the spousal abuse. All of those things were just because airing them would mean we would have had to do something about them, right?
Right. And there wasn't a lot of power. So airing them would not necessarily change anything.
Right.
And you could have backlash. And then the really big thing is the toxic shame or the shame, however you want to call it. Exactly, Jonathan, that's the patriarchy. Is that when we expose deep trauma, deep hurts, deep pain that was done to us, even if it was done, you know, often when it's done to us, we don't necessarily know that. And we feel like there's something wrong with us because of how we were talked to or treated or referred to, or even the act of being invisible can be extremely damaging. And women have been invisible for so long. And the LGBTQ community has dealt with invisibility. It's a form of neglect, which is a subtler form of abuse, which is very traumatizing. It makes you feel like who you are is not important. And this will all lead to using.
And I know that all of that is true. And so the conference, let me get back to the Finding Freedom LGBTQ conference, and it's lgbtqsymposium.com if you want to know more. And the lineup is all there and the schedule, because we have leaders from all over the country who will teach you how to make those forms and teach you. And it's not for the gays necessarily. Like as a gay woman, I had to expand and find myself, wow, how prejudiced was I all these years? But there's anyone who thinks about that they want to treat somebody who's in this gender diverse category should probably be there, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And we need our straight allies as well, more than ever, to continue to show and learn how to work with our community as best as possible. I've worked with many straight allies who are amazing when they take the time to learn this.
And we have Mackenzie Phillips, who is one of our straight allies, who's going to be talking about, that a straight therapist can bring just as much to the table in a different way as a lesbian or a gay man. And a straight woman could help a gay man, and you could help a gay man, and or a transgender. And so give us a closing thought on this. We're supposed to be a little snippet into your world, and we could talk for the whole hour and a half, and then they won't need to come to the conference.
No, definitely come to the conference, please. Come to the conference. I'm so excited to be there. I'm excited to see everybody. And the closing snippet is that there's going to be so many amazing people there, as you said. There's going to be so much to learn. You're going to walk away with an arsenal of tools, and you're going to go back to wherever you work, and you're going to feel really inspired and excited to bring all of this with you. And it will enliven your own work in whatever area you do within the treatment and psychological world.
And that arsenal, I hope we're going to use an arsenal for good.
Yeah, I know. I just used a patriarchal term.
I know, you did. It was like so easy. That would be one thing to end upon. Jonathan put in here that it was a patriarchal. And so what's the difference between the patriarchal and the misogyny?
Oh, okay. So the patriarchy is the male-oriented culture. So it's like the ideology. The ideology is male-oriented. Men are smarter, more important, and misogyny is the hatred and fear of women that is a result of and connected to a patriarchal culture that values the feminine over the masculine. I mean, the masculine over the feminine, excuse me. Whoa, what a slip there. So, the point is the masculine has always been valued over the feminine. The feminine has been devalued, demonized, denigrated. That creates a lot of misogyny.
And I think, if you're a male, I think a male therapist, I would definitely hit into her workshop too, because if you're working in a men's center, you can do a lot, because I'm sure this whole diversity issue is leaving everybody, not knowing what end is up, except for these young kids who are just growing into it and saying, hey, don't classify me. But the rest of us are confused.
Right, confused, and there is such a thing as male privilege, whether you're gay or straight, and it's a really important thing to learn about and understand how not to get caught in it. And male feminists are like the most amazing men on the planet these days, and it's a progressive movement that is blowing up, and the more that are on it, the more are going to be part of this change that we're going through. This world is changing. It's a lot of turmoil. It's really scary. It's really hard, but the world is changing, and the feminine is a big part of it.
And I think this, for a closing thought for me, is that what it's evidenced by is the amount of addiction, and it's not going away in this moment. There's it's increasing. Kids are dying on the streets, and part of it is because some of it, I think, and I'm not a PhD, is that we don't have the container to hold their experience, and we're so locked into our old experience that we need conferences like this to help us break out from our own mold in order to grow.
Right. And the idea really is that everyone's suffering from a patriarchal, misogynistic culture. Everybody.
Right. It's not working any longer.
No, it's not working, and it's harmful. extremely.
Well, Dr. Lauren, because that's your new name in 2018, right? I always love our conversations because I never know exactly where they're going to go. And
I love our conversations too, Renee.
oh no, for all those people who are listening and thinking about the Finding Freedom LGBTQ Symposium, we hope you join us. And if you register this week, I'm actually offering $100 off to get you excited, because you know what? It's the end of the year. You probably, spent your wad over at Christmas, and we want you with us, because from the Out Your Inner Artist competition to Io Tillett, who's actually gone across the country with over 5,000 pictures of people who have self-identified on the gender scale. And there's going to be a whole art show with that. Wow. And we have Yoruba Richin, a TED Talk speaker also, who talks about how the LGBTQ movement mimics the civil rights movement, which I read something the other day that was really interesting about that, is that all the time that we use to separate people into groups, the blacks, the gays, whatever, it's used to keep us down, to keep our power separate. Right. And, the feminine is about bringing all of that power back together. So the wind told me the other day is that we need to become wind powered, and that comes from connecting, not separating. So
that's great. It's a great thing to close on, the intersectionality component.
Right. And so join us. If you have any questions, please reach out to me on Facebook, PM me, or find me over at the LGBTQsymposium.com.
All right. Thank you so much for having me, Renee. Talk to you soon.
And Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.